Thanks so much for joining us. We have two very special guests now. Joining us at the moment is V. Anantha Nageshwaran, who's the CA. We also have with us Mr. Manoj Govil, who's the Expenditure Secretary. Let me start with you first, Mr. Anantha Nageshwaran. The big announcement, the one that everyone has their eyes on today, is of course as far as the relaxation, as far as the tax slabs is concerned. What do you think has been the driving idea behind this in terms of course, providing relief to the taxpayers, but also in terms of the larger goal of increasing spending in the economy? How do you see all of this panning out?
Oh, absolutely. I think it deserves to be the banner item as far as the budget is concerned, because it changes the mood and the dynamic among the middle class. And what it does is to also indirectly give a fillip to private sector capital formation, because usually world over the private sector looks at demand visibility for it to be able to undertake a capital expenditure. And one of the areas which we have been saying where the private sector could do more was in terms of the capital formation, and I think this budget provides a pathway for that. So therefore its impact on the economy is twofold. One is to lift the sentiment and mood in the middle class, put more purchasing power in their hands, create demand visibility, and also it addresses the balance sheet concerns that are developing in pockets of the middle class. And it will therefore, by putting more income in the hands of the middle class, it also raises the prospect of higher household financial savings, which in the post-COVID era have been coming down somewhat. I think although in the course of FY25 that number has been reversing for the better, this will further accelerate the process of improvement in household financial savings, which is the source of funding for both government and private sector expenditure in the long term. So therefore it actually addresses many different dimensions of the macroeconomy in a very positive way.
And also, before we go across, Mr. Govil, one thing that is very different is that earlier the government's definition of what is middle class, has that perception now drastically changed? Because it was much lower incomes that were considered middle class. Now, with this kind of relief, is there a difference in terms of perception of which are the classes that need to be given relief in your view?
I think there is no standard definition per se. I mean, across the country, even within this country, different people talk about numbers ranging all the way from 6 lakhs or 12 lakhs per annum to up to 1 crore of income. People define themselves as middle class. But I think that the important thing is we should also understand that the earlier valuations of what constituted middle class, anecdotally in people's minds, was when the economic size was very different. Now we're talking about an economy that is going to be about 360 lakh crores. So naturally, therefore, the definition of what constitutes middle class must also expand accordingly.
Absolutely. Mr. Govil, coming to you now, with 24% of central income that comes from borrowing and other liabilities, 20% allocated for repayments, what steps can be taken to reduce dependency on borrowing, and what can be done to improve fiscal discipline to ease the burden of debt in the future? Already, of course, a lot that's been announced in terms of the fiscal deficit, etc., in this budget.
Yes, so the government borrows. When the government borrows, it has to pay the principal, it has to pay the interest from time to time. And interest burden essentially is a function of the total borrowing by the government. So one of the things which has been announced in this budget is to reduce the debt burden over the next few years from somewhere around 57% now to around 50% plus minus 1%. So as the debt burden on the central government goes down, the proportion of the money which is being spent for interest payments will also come down.
Right. Also, Mr. Anantha Nageshwaran, if I can ask you, as far as Make in India initiative itself is concerned, it's completing about 10 years, yet, going by the statistics, the manufacturing sector's share in GDP remains below the 2013-14 levels. With the launch of the National Manufacturing Mission, how will this initiative be different from others?
To address your point about the share of GDP staying below 2013 level, we should not forget that the second decade of the millennium was taken up by balance sheet repair. And second, manufacturing and export performance of Indian manufacturing sector suffered because global demand growth was very weak as well. So we have to appreciate the fact that the second decade was balance sheet repair, and it would have naturally resulted in improvement in the manufacturing share of GDP, but for the fact that the pandemic, followed by the war in Europe, in Ukraine, and then the oil price shock, followed by interest rate shock, all of them followed one after the other. So I think this national manufacturing mission, together with the fillip given to labor-intensive manufacturing sectors like footwear, toys, etc., will breathe new life into this concept, into the idea of boosting manufacturing share of GDP. Apart from the fact that the Honorable Finance Minister also looked at boosting several other areas of manufacturing, such as creating allocation for renewable energy projects, for nuclear power, ensuring energy affordability, energy security, etc. All of this will directly or indirectly play into, and then more importantly, the deregulation agenda itself will play into the concept of boosting the manufacturing share of GDP.
Right. So one of the other aspects that I wanted to talk to you about was, the economic survey estimating a 6.3 to 6.8% growth rate for FY26 and recommending that there should be at least an 8% growth rate to sustain the Viksit Bharat goals for 2047. What are you looking at in this budget that can actually help us further take this growth rate further?
I mean, as I, in the course of my earlier responses to your questions, I did point out the fact that this budget, even though it doesn't speak directly about the global economic challenges, it kind of recognizes them by putting a lot of emphasis on various domestic drivers of growth, be it agriculture, be it MSME sector, energy transition, and labor-intensive manufacturing, etc. So in that sense, this budget absolutely advances the agenda of boosting the medium-term growth prospect of the Indian economy and takes it closer to our aspirational goal of achieving sustained average 8% GDP growth.
Right. Mr. Govil, if I can come to you in terms of the budget doubling the credit guarantee cover for micro enterprises, it's gone from over 5 crore to 10 crore and 1.5 lakh crore in additional credit over the next 5 years. How do you see this impacting the overall growth of the MSMEs?
So for MSME sector especially, a lot of emphasis has been given to credit. Now, when you give credit, sometimes the MSMEs don't have sufficient collateral, and there are various schemes to give them money without collateral or with little collateral. So these schemes, which has been announced in the budget recently, and in the last year's budget also, in July budget also, there was one scheme like that. So the idea is to give MSMEs access to greater quantities of credit, both as a working capital as well as for their utilization for buying capital assets. And for this purpose, this particular scheme has been announced. So, and the finance minister in the budget speech also mentioned that MSMEs are a driver for growth, they are a driver for exports also. The employment in terms of the people engaged in the manufacturing sector are much higher in MSMEs as compared to the larger units. So in terms of all of them, if more credit is given under the scheme, it will really help.
Right. Mr. Anantha Nageshwaran, I'd also like to ask you in terms of export promotion, of course, is one of the big goals, but also in terms of tariffs. If you're looking at a situation, of course, we know what Mr. Trump has said in terms of the United States. How prepared are we to take on, that kind of a tariff if there is such a reciprocal tariff as has been threatened from the United States side, if that is implemented?
I think it is not very possible to discuss this in hypothetical terms. And general high-level discussion on this topic also will yield very little in terms of insight, because ultimately how we respond depends on what kind of tariff magnitude in which sectors and what is our leeway, etc. The answers will vary very different depending on the sector and the quantum of our exposure to the US market in those sectors, etc. And first of all, the very idea of the tariff imposition in India is still a matter of speculation. Nothing has happened yet. So I think there isn't much purpose served in discussing this in purely hypothetical terms at this point.
All right. Sir, last question to you. I'm just quoting from the statement of the former finance minister, and he has said that the takeaway from budget 2025-26 is that the ruling party is wooing tax-paying middle class and the Bihar electorate. Announcements will be welcomed by these 3.2 crore tax-paying middle class and 7.6 crore voters of Bihar. For the rest of India, the finance minister had nothing more than soothing words. Do you think that's a fair assessment of the budget?
I think we have to go beyond the tax cut, even though that was the headline item for many people. I mean, the focus on agriculture, the focus on renewable energy supply chain, and the focus on critical minerals and labor-intensive manufacturing, and also the focus on deregulation. All these things affect positively 140 crore Indians, not just the 3.2 plus 7.6 crore people.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Anantha Nageshwaran and Mr. Govil, for joining us and breaking down the budget for our viewers.